it was very convincing because I was riding so much better right away. That like I'm riding inside the bike instead of ending up in the back seat when the trail gets difficult. Like I'm just bad riding habits, right? And so for something mechanical on the bike to encourage you to ride your bike better, because it's not discouraging you from riding your bike the way that you just naturally want to. Like if I was off the brakes, I would be in a good riding position, but I'm a chicken, so I'm not.
Welcome to the Canadian Cycling Magazine podcast. I'm Matthew Pioro, and with me is Terry McCall. Welcome, Terry.
Hi, glad to be here.
Terry's back. Now, listeners, longtime listeners, no doubt, you recognize the name Terry McCall, mountain bike editor. We've finally got him back on the pod, and the reason he's here is for some pretty big news, and I'm excited to hear all about it from Terry. Terry, what is it that brings you back to the podcast?
Well, Shimano finally has a new XTR group. And for the first time, it is a wireless group, which is a first for Shimano across road, gravel, mountain. And it also is a long-awaited announcement for Shimano to finally compete with SRAM's wireless access group.
And in February, you actually traveled to Arizona to learn and ride this new group set from Shimano. And as you mentioned, it's XTR. It's been about, I think, 7 years since the last iteration of this top-of-the-line MTB group set came out. In this episode, you interview Nick Murdick from Shimano. He's the mountain bike product manager at Shimano North America. You and Nick get into all the good stuff about XTR, and that's coming up. Terry, before we hear your conversation with Nick, set the scene a bit. What did you see in Arizona? And actually, what were you expecting to see before you got there?
Yeah, I wasn't really sure what to expect from XTR until a couple of sneaky product photos were released online, not by Shimano. But the big question was whether or not it would be wireless and what other standards it would or would not follow. And Shimano's kind of gone their own way on this. I talk about that a lot in my review. In addition to 2 days riding in Arizona, I've been on this group for the past three and a half months back here on Vancouver Island at home. And it's really interesting. And I talk about all those details in my full review, which is live on the website now. But with Nick, we're going to talk a bit more about the development process, how Shimano made the decisions, some of which are going to raise eyebrows about which direction they wanted to go with XTR.
What I found interesting from your discussion with Nick was just the internal debates that went on within Shimano as to what to include, what not to include, and some of the engineering challenges they faced, and just the different inputs, say, that were affecting the development process, not only from inside but outside, whether that's riders' expectations, market expectations, competitors. It's a fascinating blend of just forces that come to bear on this new group set.
Yeah, Shimano's arguably on the back foot a bit here because SRAM's had 2 versions of Access come out, and they've been able to kind of set the terms for the wireless groups. So it was really interesting to see Shimano go their own way and why they decided to do that. But I think we should let Nick explain that. He was there for the whole thing, the whole ride, and he knows a lot more of the details than either of us.
All right, and I'm always fascinated by what Shimano does on the MTB side, because not just for the tech itself, not just for the MTB side of things, but because it seems that the mountain bike tech migrates to the other group set, such as road and gravel. And I think we get hints of where things are going in this talk. So without further ado, let's hear Terry's interview with Nick Murdick of Shimano.
Nick, could you please just introduce yourself so we all know who you are and why we are talking to you?
Yeah. Hello. My name's Nick Murdick. I'm based out of Irvine, California. I'm the mountain bike product manager for Shimano North America. And I sit on the global product development team for Shimano.
So this is Shimano's first fully wireless drivetrain, not just in mountain biking, but like across all disciplines, which is pretty exciting. But before we get into the new stuff, I wanted to quickly go over a bit of what led us here. And Shimano started the shift to electronic shifting with Di2, first on the road, and then with the original XTR Di2, which I think was M9050.
Correct. Yeah.
Which was a 2x11 speed group. And that's about like a decade ago now. So what led that first XTR group to disappear, or at least like not get developed into tall speed wide range group?
Yeah, that's a good question, actually. So I've been getting a lot of phone memories of what happened 7 years ago, because it's been almost exactly 7 years since we launched the current M9100 group. So yeah, I was going out to races, hanging out with journalists and taking lots of pictures and been seeing all of that. And I can tell you that the answer to that question at the time is where's the new Di2 group, is that sales hadn't been great for it. We were still working on it, but basically we didn't want it to hold up the new technology that was coming out with, at the time, our first wide range 1x12, 500% gear spread, dedicated 1x group. And of course, there still was a front derailleur 7 years ago too, which we kind of just quietly discontinued. But at the time it was, let's just keep working. And our intention from the beginning was that we think we're going to have the Di2 option come out a year, maybe 2 years later. But if we get 2 years down the road and we don't feel like we've been able to come up with something compelling to make people want electronic shifting on their bikes in better numbers, then we'll just scrap it and wait until the next generation and take another stab at it. So that was like our internal strategy. And in that 2-year window, competing product came on the market that totally shifted the requirements and made it clear, really it was, we never saw it that way. And we were really skeptical at the beginning that just the fact that it's wireless and making it look much better on the bike and be much easier to work with, it didn't seem like to us the kind of thing that was going to be compelling enough to make it take over in the market. Obviously, we were wrong about that, but it meant that we needed to start over. And it's any mistake is an opportunity to learn. And I think that we're coming back to the table a lot more focused on the rider's perspective now. And right, I guess about 5 years ago, we started over, but we had a lot of work to do because there were some difficult patents to work around. So that's really why it's been 7 years instead of 5 years or something like that, is that we had to figure out how to make a fully wireless system and get a battery inside of a derailleur.
For sure. So Shimano has still been very dominant in electronic shifting on the roadside, and that does have semi-wireless. So what about the development of the wireless XTR group? It took so much longer than say Dura-Ace coming out.
Yeah, it's a great indication and kind of proof of what I just said, right? That that wireless protocol we were able to develop a couple of years ago with the Dura-Ace group. So the way that the shifter and the derailleur talk to each other, it's lightning fast. It's actually faster than the shift signal going through the wire. So that thing was ready to go. It's unchanged for these new XTR shifters and derailleurs talking to each other. It really was just getting the battery inside the derailleur that was the hard thing to do. And maybe we got kind of lucky too, but that's a bigger, more complicated story about the shape of the derailleur and how we let's put it inside the parallelogram.
Nice. That is a big change from some of the other options out there. Was that entirely just working around patents, or how did that come about?
And I can tell you, we were talking to bike brands, like the product managers that spec the bikes for all through the course of the development. And it wasn't that long ago that we were saying, okay, so the battery's got to live on the frame somewhere. Where should the battery go? Do you want it to mount to the frame, or do you want it to be inside the down tube? And so we had gotten pretty far down working on the derailleur, thinking that it was going to be impossible to put the battery inside the derailleur. And so part of what we were working on was, how do you make a derailleur super, super strong? And how do you let it hit rocks over and over and over again and survive? And what the derailleur engineer had been working on was this concept of making the leading edge really skinny and then turning the whole derailleur into a wedge so that it can get scooped out of the way over and over and over again. And then he kind of ended up with the parallelogram needing to be really wide. And then, everybody, I think, just kind of looking at each other that like, hey, there's enough room for a battery in there now. So maybe that's where we could put it.
Oh, that's awesome. Because that comes with some advantages too. Like it's completely sealed off from weather, and out here on the West Coast, we get quite a bit of weather, so that's been great.
Yeah.
And then you brought up the automatic impact recovery function, which beyond just being wireless, I think is the most interesting part of the new rear derailleur. As someone who's been around on bikes for about 25 years, it was not to like blow smoke, but it was kind of mind-blowing to when we were riding around in Arizona to hit a rock and look down just on time to see it like go beep boop and right back into place and just keep riding.
Yeah.
What were some of the challenges to making something like that work, and how important was that feature to have compared to like Shimano already had a crash mode that you had to like manually get back out of?
Right. I think, it had been kind of on our list of things to do to make that original crash recovery mode a little bit more user friendly. And I can remember when we had pro racers on the M9050 Di2 group. This was going back more than 10 years now, but that they could be on a rough course and the derailleur go into crash recovery mode and then not knowing really what to do. Like, I'm in the middle of a race. Like, how do I get it to come back? So it's kind of been on that long-term list of things to do, is make it automatic. And so that mechanism of putting in a torque limiter, like a sensor in the derailleur itself so that it can absorb the impact and then move back. Luckily, that was an idea that we had been working on for a really long time. But then kind of as the whole concept started coming together for the derailleur, that like, okay, we got the wedge shape, we've got the battery inside the parallelogram, we've got our stress analysis to make sure that it's stronger than a derailleur hanger. We've made the decision to use a derailleur hanger, which was a really big one, right? Those last kind of pieces that fit together, like how can impact recovery mode work with the rest of the derailleur? Those kind of final confirmation steps really grew back from analysis of derailleurs that failed on pro race bikes at Enduro World Cups. And so we had these kind of a bunch of categories of like derailleur gets hit here, fails this way. And so every single one of those things needed to have an answer that like, if the derailleur gets hit this way, what is going to be the next thing that happens in the derailleur that the rider has to do that's going to happen to the frame, whatever. So of course, the most common one was taking an impact from the leading edge at the top of we call it the P body, where the parallelogram connects to the rest of the derailleur. So getting hit right there and then sending a force through the rest of the derailleur, it basically wants to rotate the derailleur backwards and push it inboard. And so we helped it push it inboard with the wedge shape. And then a key part of the derailleur hanger is that it allows the derailleur to rotate backwards based on that mounting point and then spring back on its own. So really, yeah, I think we were laying the pieces in place for many years, and then right at the end there, like turning it all that technology into a product was really just like, yeah, this is how we got to go back to that original idea of hit a rock over and over and over and zero interruption to the rider or the racer. And keep coming back for more.
Awesome. And then one thing you mentioned in there a couple times is the wedge shape. And that like deflects forces in a different way, but it also required moving away from the Shadow Plus clutch mechanism.
Yeah.
Can you talk a bit about the advantages and disadvantages of moving away from that? Because I think a lot of people really associate Shadow Plus with like what makes Shimano derailleurs work really well.
Yeah, me too. That was the hardest one for me to give up. For sure. It was the most debated topic internally about the pros and cons. That's, the benefit of you talking to a product manager right now is that I'm not here to spin stuff. Like, I'll tell you there was a period where I was fighting pretty hard to keep the clutch, that like, I don't care. I don't feel like the trade-off is worth it. So basically, just what's going on inside of there is that there's a really strong spring that has got the same breakaway force as a traditional clutch does. So there are a lot of other benefits actually that come along with that, with it being a spring that does the job instead of a clutch. For one thing, a clutch, as soon as the clutch breaks free and the pulley cage does start moving, there's a pretty dinky little spring inside of there trying to pull it back. So you lose chain wrap through rough riding terrain, and that could lead to things like chain drop or bad shifting or loss of driving efficiency, because it isn't just big hits. It's like anytime you're riding on dirt. So being able to make a basically smoother shifting, being able to shift under more load, improving driving efficiency, having such good chain retention that, well, I was about to talk about a future product, but there were a lot of things that the engineers were listing as like, this is what we get. And from an engineer's point of view, right, like it all totally made sense that like, yeah, now, I mean, the shifting is better. Like I can feel an improvement in the performance of the bike. The main reason for doing it, though, like this was step one, was that we needed that to get much skinnier. Like a clutch just takes up so much space that we create this big squared off leading edge of that P body. And then not only that, but the housing for the clutch makes that part of the derailleur super fragile. So it is the most likely part of a derailleur to actually snap if something's going to snap. And there's only so many ways to fit a clutch in there. Like you can make one that mounts to a plate and has a cover on it, but like that cover isn't structural, right? Like it's that tiny little plate that the clutch is mounted on that really is the structural part of your derailleur. You could also hollow it out from the backside, but then you end up having really thin pieces. Like there really isn't a great way to have a strong housing for a clutch. Like it just takes up too much space. I think people get thrown by the fact that there are two springs inside of there. The only reason that there's two springs is that if you want to make the spring any stronger, you can make it thicker and bigger, or you can add a second spring. And if you add a second spring, then you can keep it super skinny. So it's just two springs that are nested in each other. There's no other reason for it other than it's skinnier. The trade-off is kind of depends on the riding situation. For most people, most of the time on most trails, because the breakaway force for the pulley cage is the same as what it was for a clutch, that there's no difference in the amount of chain slap or noise that you get while you're riding. But anytime things start moving a little bit more wildly, that stronger spring is going to try to reset the derailleur back to its like starting point, like my stable riding condition really, really quickly. And when it does that violently, then we can get some noise from like the derailleur starting to float backwards and then slamming back into the frame, or the chain being pulled tight and hitting the bottom of the chain ring. And so that was a hard thing to wrap our heads around, that like, okay, we're accepting more noise in some situations and some riders will never notice a difference. The other positive is that there are a lot of people with Shimano Shadow Plus clutches now that are actually getting worse performance than what I just described because their clutches are wearing out. Or maybe you throw your bike in the back of the car and head up to Whistler, and then you take your bike out of the back of the van or the truck, and then you forget to turn the clutch back on. And now you're doing runs with no clutch whatsoever, and your bike's making a racket like that. It's all part of the equation, right? That like if a clutch if you're not religious about servicing it, then your performance is actually worse than everything I just described, like this compromise. The thing that kind of was finally the tipping point for me was looking at it from like an Enduro World Cup racer's point of view, that O-chains and chain guides are so common on those bikes. And I think really, a lot of people who are likely to end up with a noisier drivetrain have got something on their bike that's going to mitigate noise anyway. And O-chain does an awful lot because it dampens that point where the spring pulls back on the chain really, really quickly. And then MRP makes a chain guide that's got just like a little lower guide that doesn't touch the chain, but it keeps it from unwrapping from the bottom of the chain ring. And that chain re-engaging with the crank can be one of the sources of noise. So it helps keep the bike really quiet anyway. If riders are going to have those parts on their bike anyway, then the reality is that their bike isn't getting noisier. So that guy who's riding his bike the absolute hardest gets to have his cake and eat it too, because he's got the improved performance and the quiet bike.
Awesome. Cross country is getting harder and harder these days, but it's still not like getting the force that an EWS race has, or I guess Enduro World Cup race has now. So they're, in theory, not getting the same amount of noise.
I left off the biggest mitigating factor there too, which is the short cage derailleur that works with the 945 cassette. That the existence of that thing was a 60-70% of why it was acceptable. That really, I feel like that's the better drivetrain, and the shorter pulley cage just means that we lose a lot of that violent return to that starting position. So the 945 cassette and short cage derailleur means that your drivetrain is going to be a lot quieter. And I mean, if I'm going to put a number plate on my bike, it's going to be a cross country race or marathon race. And I'm not like a super skilled descender, but for a marathon, cross country, Clydesdale, Masters, retired, semi-pro, like I'm all right at going downhill. And so it's good to do noise testing on the short travel bike out on the local trails. And like I've got a local trail picked out for noise testing, and the short cage derailleur on that trail is dead quiet. Like you get the normal like chain hitting the frame. If it's going to hit the frame, it's going to hit the frame. But any additional noise that's coming from the derailleur, like returning violently, is eliminated with the short cage derailleur. So any cross country racers who buy into the it's better to have a lighter bike, like you get to drop 65 grams if you go with that short cage derailleur, then they would never have any noise issues. For sure, I think part of it too is that on race day when the crowd's screaming, you don't hear your bike at all either.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the short cage making it over to Di2 might surprise some people, because there's just so much talk about wide range and making sure you have the hugest cassette you possibly can these days. Mm-hmm. Who do you see opting for that short cage 945 option?
It will be 100% of enduro racers, I can tell you that, because it's already like 95% of enduro World Cup racers use our 1045 spec. And they don't do it with smaller chain rings. They all run 34 tooth chain rings, and just they're strong enough that a 34 or 45 is a good enough climbing gear, even for those big days in the saddle. For cross-country racers, we had gotten to a point 6 years ago, maybe, like there was really early adoption of the short cage derailleur because it was lighter for cross-country racers. And then when in 2021, when we could start going to World Cups again after our pause, I went back out to races and saw a bunch of teams using 1051s and was asking questions. And they were saying that riders felt like they were losing efficiency and they wanted their chain to be wrapped around more gears. And yeah, this is good practice, because I'm going to give my first team presentation next week, and I've got to try to sell them on the like, hey, I think that the 945 is better. The important thing is that our teams always get to choose, right? Like we're never trying to like push an agenda, say like, you need to ride this because this is what we want to sell. So I'm going to explain that to teams starting next week, is that I think that the 945 is better because it's lighter all the time. And driving efficiency is kind of a weird one that like theoretically we can say, yeah, your chain is wrapped around more teeth, and so it doesn't have to bend as tightly in order to get around those additional teeth. But at that time, back in 2021, when the racers had been moving away from the 1045 and back to the 1051, they were saying chain wrapped around more teeth, but their chainring size wasn't getting big enough to really justify that. They were putting a chainring on that was 2 teeth bigger, and 1 rear shift is equal to 4 teeth in the front. That's a good, like, we can just lock that in our head as like, that's what the equation is. So if you're only going 2 teeth bigger in the front, when you're moving from 1051 to 1045, that 45 to 51, that is 1 full shift. That's what the second biggest cog is on a 1051 cassette. It's a 45. So basically they were only getting a half shift back in the front by using a bigger chainring. So half the time they would have a fractionally improved driving efficiency because they would be in 1 bigger cog in the back. But 100% of the time they were carrying around an extra 60 grams or whatever it ended up being. It gets more complicated than there. From there, I'm mentally prepared for getting into the weeds with the teams next week when we get to talk about, okay, so you've got your 9-tooth cog and you're concerned about that. I remember 7 years, 8, 9 years ago when you were concerned about a 10-tooth cog and you didn't want to lose your driving efficiency and you thought that the 11 was the sweet spot and the best we could ever go. So that the 945 has got an 11 tooth cog, and you haven't had that in a while. And that literally is like one of our skunk development riders who's a retired World Cup cross country racer. That was a big benefit for him. He's like, man, I miss that 11 tooth cog. Like, that is super nerdy, but like, it feels like an old friend. Like, that is, yeah, it's a good gear ratio. It's a good gear to be pushing. And then to have like a bailout sprint gear on top of that, like, yeah, I mean, think of it like an 1145 with a mega range sprint gear on top of it. Whatever gets you to sleep at night.
I don't think I've ever identified so personally with the cog. That's amazing.
Yeah.
But to step away from the equipment for a second, this is World Cup teams have started with the old drivetrains. How hard is it to convince teams to switch mid-season to the new stuff?
I mean, everybody knows that it's coming. And so, yeah, most of it has been, look, I know you've got this stuff ready. Like, our bike brand sponsor has got, is taking delivery of stuff. Like, what do you mean I can't race on it? So they're very anxious this time around to put those new parts on their bike. Yeah, no problem.
Okay, so to get back to the derailleur before we move on to the rest of the group, it does have the maybe unexpected use of a standard derailleur hanger instead of the direct mount system that we're seeing a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Did you guys consider using that approach at all? And if you did, can you walk us through the kind of decision to stick with what?
And I wouldn't rule it out for the future either. Like, we've got some ideas on how we can achieve our two non-negotiable requirements that a hanger gives you that a frame-mounted derailleur doesn't give you. And I kind of mentioned one of them earlier, that when the derailleur hits a rock, it wants to rotate the derailleur backwards. And we've already got a great way to absorb that kind of impact with a derailleur hanger, because the derailleur bolts to the hanger, and then you get a point of rotation right there at that mounting point. We call that the B axle. That's the Shimano term. It's the bracket axle. So free rotation around the B axle, very important to us. And it's hard to pull that off, though not impossible, if you've got a frame-mounted design. I can tell you maybe because we're kind of dancing around it, the derailleur hangers have also got the ability to rotate backwards. But we haven't really seen evidence of that feature actually saving a derailleur or even a frame, and maybe sometimes doing more harm than good. So it can be a bit complicated why, but basically, I mean, for one thing, if the hanger rotates backwards in the frame, or if a frame mounted derailleur that's doing the same thing rotates backwards and then stays there, like, it's easy enough to say the rider just needs to get off and reset the derailleur. But what if you're in a timed stage or in the middle of a cross country race? And then what if you don't know that it happened? Just like I'm able to hang out in the lift line at Whistler and see a dozen bikes where people have forgotten to turn their Shadow Plus clutch switch back on because they just brought it out of the car or out of the bike travel case. Same thing with a derailleur or hanger that's taken an impact and rotated backwards, and the rider doesn't know that they need to reset it. Like, you don't have a really great indicator that it's time to do that. And if you look around, like, it's something that you can spot if you're at festivals, that like, hey, that thing just needs to be like nudged back forward again. And right, so being able to rotate backwards in order to take an impact and reset on your own, that's one thing that a derailleur hanger gives us. The other thing, and this was a bit more crucial, is that I said we had this list of ways that a derailleur can take an impact and how it fails. One of them, which I guess, well, I encountered it during that media camp in Arizona. The speech had always been, this is not something for mere mortals like me. Like, I'm not trying to huck over rock gardens, but it does happen for hard charging, Enduro World Cup racers for sure, is that the fastest line is this way. And that means hucking over this rock garden. And if you come up short and the derailleur comes down on top of the rock, it was a common mode of failure that we have observed at World Cup races. And, the only way for the derailleur to absorb that impact, or for the bike to absorb that impact, is by bending the derailleur hanger. Like, even if it could blow your derailleur to smithereens, like, if the derailleur's mounted to the frame, like, there's just not a good mode of failure there. So like I said, we're certainly not ruling out a frame mounted derailleur in the future, but it would need to be some kind of new evolution of it that would take care of those two things. Is that the derailleur needs to be able to come down on top of a rock and not snap the frame. And really, like ideally, what we want is that derailleur hanger to just bend in that situation so that the racer can keep racing, get to the bottom of the stage, at least lay some power down, like at least the bike is sort of functional. And, for years, all of our sponsored Enduro World Cup racers have had a derailleur hanger like taped underneath their saddle. And so that's really like it's our long-term mode of failure too, is like, yeah, get to the bottom of that stage and pop your new hanger in there. Like you've been carrying it around for years. Like today's the day, go do it.
And can we dance around the competition quite a bit in the last couple questions? How much pressure was there with the other wireless drivetrains coming out to have an answer to that competition, like internally, from consumers, from brands? And I know you're the product manager, so we can keep your answer limited to that if you want.
Sure, yeah. It's, anytime we go out to a race or a festival and we've got a Shimano truck set up, it's the number one question we get. And a lot of internet comments too, that like all Shimano needs to do is make a wireless 12-speed electronic group. And like, I'm back on board. Like I want to like Shimano. It is a bit more complicated than that. From the pressure really, like, especially from OEM customers was, hey, there's no customer for a $10,000 bike with mechanical shifting. So at the XTR price point, like I got no need for mechanical shifting. And the fact that you only have mechanical shifting at the XTR price point means that there is no XTR. And then that had a cascading effect down to XT as well. And we do pretty well with market share as we get to the Dior price point. And that really ends up kind of being our specialty anyway, like as a manufacturing and engineering company and doing everything in-house that we can make really high quality product at like that Dior price point, that like true function and really only delivering what's absolutely necessary, right? Like best performance at lowest price. That's our wheelhouse for sure. I think though that when we get into like the that space below XTR and above Dior, that it's not so clear actually. And I think that OEM product managers and even a lot of riders would say the same thing, that the newest, coolest bikes have mostly had electronic shifting on them for the last couple of years, but riders haven't really had like a mechanical shifting option. You know, people have expected something new from us. OEM product managers have seen, XT components getting to be 6 years old and specs starting to drop off. Like these are all kind of normal things. Like the modern expectation of a bike is that it should be able to take a really big hit. And so like just a more modern, beefier looking derailleur needs to be bolted onto that bike. So if you think about how somebody's shopping for a bike, that like, I want something modern and kind of future proof, something that's going to feel relevant for the next couple of years. Up until very recently, the end of that equation would be, I'm going to get a bike with electronic shifting. And whether or not they got a bike with electronic shifting may have never been a part of their decision-making process. It was just, in order to get what I want, I have to accept electronic shifting. So for sure, the most important thing that's next on our plate is an update to XT and Dior mechanical shifting. And that's about as much as I can say on it for now.
Sounds good. And then I guess the flip side of that is, does that pressure to match the competition push your design forward in any unexpected ways? Like, was there any positive from that drive?
Yeah, for sure. And there's a lot of interesting Japanese cultural stuff too that is really part of that big picture and drives me nuts sometimes, but is really like you can really appreciate it too. They really don't want to look at competition too much. It's never really like doing back-to-back testing of like making sure that we're checking all these boxes. It's really like, for the most part, I think the way we looked at it was a competitor was able to identify like a new requirement in the marketplace, and the wireless shifting with good aesthetics and like nice user friendliness, I would say that that's like the market requirement that they tapped into that we missed out on. The super strong derailleur was something that we had been working on before the transmission derailleur came out, and so that one not so much of a reaction. But where the pressure came in was kind of as we were, really like at the end of that development of the rear derailleur, and thinking, man, I don't know if we're going to be able to get the battery inside. Like, I think we're going to give up. And then that was when the Mr. Shimano steps in and says that derailleur is going to be wireless and you guys are going to figure it out. And so then that got us that last final push. So it's paying attention to the competition. I mean, it's my job all day, every day to talk to the OEM bike brand product managers, take their feedback and push it up the chain inside Shimano. But it's almost like it's their job to ignore it sometimes. And that's the frustration that I'm talking about. Is like the message from the market is so clear and they're very good about, let's not let that cloud our vision. That like, let's break this down to the rider experience and the market requirements and go from there and make our own thing.
Yeah. I mean, that's certainly different than like the comment section on a website.
Yeah.
So talking about demands from different OEM specs, one of the things that you also get to deal with is the division between people that want external and internally routed cables, or hoses for brakes.
Yeah.
So how do you split what is becoming a very divisive issue when you're designing like a new brake lever?
Yeah, this actually goes back more than 10 years. I think I can remember having our first conversation about it. And maybe it was like a concept bike that was shown at the Taipei Cycle Show or something like that, that had, like we were starting to see concept bikes with brake hoses going through the handlebar and then through the headset. And then, I mean, we had seen what had happened to like triathlon bikes and then road bikes of like super clean integration. And so we were all kind of looking at each other that like, this is coming for mountain bike too. Like, what's our strategy going to be? And from the very first conversation, it was, let's see if we can always design for external routing first. Like it kind of, I don't know, especially in North America, I feel like it's part of like the mountain bike aesthetic that we should have the right amount of exposure of our systems working on display. And already that's divisive, and it's not the same all the way around the world either, right? Like you look at a Scott bike and obviously they are not on the same page as that program. Like hiding the shock is definitely not putting that shock on display. But this creates an interesting situation for OEM product managers that are trying to sell a global product, is that that Scott bike really does resonate quite well in parts of the European market with some kinds of riders. And so it was Chris Kokalis from Pivot laid it out really well for me that if I do hoses that go through a headset, I'm losing some sales in North America. And if I don't do it, then I'm losing some sales in Europe. So I think what that puts a lot of product managers in the position of is thinking about which model is going to sell better in which market. And so you can see in some cases where like a cross-country bike will get hoses going through a headset, but the trail or enduro bikes won't. And it feels like that's maybe part of the dividing line. But coming back to that kind of North American aesthetic, and anytime we're conflicted inside of our global product development team, if it's road bike stuff, Europe wins. If it's mountain bike stuff, North America wins, which is lucky for me to be able to say. But I think we all, like the mountain bikers inside of Japan were basically on the same page that like, I mean, you can't argue with the fact that making a bike look better with external routing doesn't have like a really nice benefit to it, right? That like, well, so if I can make the bike look really cool and not have to deal with the downside of hoses going through the headset, struggling with the bearing sealing, going through headset bearings really quick, having to bleed your brakes if you want to make some changes to your front end, stuff like that. Like if I can have the hoses go fully external and still check all those boxes, or at least 90% of that box, then that's a win-win. Like why wouldn't I do it? So that became that kind of, I guess, guiding light for us on the product management team is directing engineering to make a brake lever with hose routing that will look good externally. Like, let's figure something out. Let's figure out the way that the hose connects to the brake lever or the oil path inside the brake lever so that we can accomplish this. And then engineering comes back with their proposed solution, which is if we connect the hose just a couple millimeters away from the handlebar and parallel with the handlebar, then the hose will kind of be naturally hidden by the handlebar and will look super clean without having to go inside the bar, inside the headset.
And then one of the other new things about the new brakes is the angle of the brake lever, which seems like a pretty subtle change, but makes a pretty big difference on the bike. Can you talk about how that was developed and why, or how that changes the ride experience a bit?
Yeah, and it's a good way to talk about, I think, where ideas come from too. Because initially there was like a request from one of our skunk development riders, Nathan Riddle, based out of Ashland, Oregon. He had this idea floating around in his head for a while that I want the pivot point for the brake lever to be closer to the handlebar. Because you can kind of imagine that the tip of the brake lever, when you pull it, it's moving in a big circle, like you're seeing part of the arc that it's tracing. And so it might be intuitive that you want the pivot point to be the same distance from the bar as your knuckle so that you're basically pulling that lever blade straight back. But he said, I want the pivot point to be close to the bar so that I'm at the top of that arc so that the lever blade is moving outward when I'm pulling the brake lever. And that's because when you're riding aggressively, like with elbows out and like your weight balance like nice and centered in the bike, that your fingers don't reach straight out and pull straight back, that they're moving at an angle. So let's make the brake lever match what you're doing. Then that request from the rider, like his proposal, basically got handed off to the engineers that were working on the design of the new brake lever. And so they were, they're always looking for any kind of improvement that they can make. And if there's an ergonomic improvement, then yeah, that sounds like a great generational improvement. But then that got them down this path of improving ergonomics and making the movement of the brake lever match the way that the human body moves. And so then the engineers took that concept and said, well, yeah, I mean, if we're really thinking about how your finger approaches the brake lever and then pulls on it, why would we use a flat brake lever? Like, your fingers don't approach the brake lever at that angle. Like, it should be swept up if we want it to match what the rider's body is actually doing. The initial prototypes were a lot more aggressive too. And so, yeah, looking back on it now, I almost wish that we were a little bit more aggressive with it, but it was really, it looked weird. Like, you had to have your brake levers rotated way further forward, and then the lever blades were going to come back up. So 5 degrees is a very easy to live with number, right? That it doesn't look weird. It doesn't really affect your setup all that much, but you do get the benefit an awful lot. And I'll tell you, I was very skeptical of it. And maybe I need to admit that it sounded like hokum because it came from our R&D department instead of the request from the pro rider. That I was on board from the get-go of the pivot point needs to get closer, but the upswept lever blade, I was like, come on, really? And it was, it was 30 seconds into the first ride where I realized that I was cornering better because I wasn't I guess subconsciously being encouraged to pull my elbows in to work around the way that the brake lever worked. And yeah, like I said, I'm an okay rider. I probably should have seen through that many, many years ago and started tweaking my setup or done a better job of riding with my hands off the end of the bars. But it was very convincing because I was riding so much better right away. That I'm riding inside the bike instead of ending up in the back seat when the trail gets difficult. I'm just bad riding habits, right? And so for something mechanical on the bike to encourage you to ride your bike better, because it's not discouraging you from riding your bike the way that you just naturally want to. If I was off the brakes, I would be in a good riding position, but I'm a chicken, so I'm not.
Yeah. I guess the opposite end of that, where scale back a bit so that it doesn't look too weird, was the original XTR Di2 lever, shift lever, sorry, switching over to shifters, which took full advantage of the freedom that going wireless gives you to kind of start from a blank slate when deciding a shift lever. Mm-hmm. So the new one looks a lot more conventional, even if it's a bit different. How much do you balance the opportunity to do something new and better with the need to keep shifters at least somewhat familiar in function?
Yeah, there is some excellent opportunities to look at the the relationship between a product manager and an engineer in that conversation there. That engineers didn't want to let go of this concept that no, don't make me make a mechanical shifter like it's electronic. I can do whatever I want now. Like I can dream, I can make the best ergonomics ever because I'm not chained to it. And then you jerks go out and show it to the test riders at a test camp. And then some people really get along well with the concept, and everybody's poo-pooing it from the beginning or coming into it skeptical. And then on the last day of the test camp, we had the exact same statement come up from every rider during every wrap-up meeting is okay, I feel like we made some really good progress in this camp, but for the next one, can you just for a benchmark, could you just make an electronic mechanical shifter? Let me just try them side by side. I want to make sure that this is better than what we've had before. The other way to see it too is that we got to be careful to not be old fogey mountain bikers that are just so attached to our mechanical shifters that that's what you grew up with, man. That's why you like it. But I don't really think that that's true anymore. I was so hesitant to admit it because I'm so afraid of going down that path that somebody who's never ridden Shimano components and never ridden mechanical shifters should be able to hop on this thing, and it should be super intuitive as well. And we got to recognize that that's probably most of the customers that are going to be buying a Shimano wireless shifting bike over the next couple of years is somebody who's never ridden it before, never ridden a Shimano mechanical shifter before. But really, the way that I started to look at it was that, I've got some cool museum bikes hanging behind me in my little office here. I guess the one with the top-mounted XT shifters isn't in the room right now, but that was where we started from, right? Was a shifter that was above the handlebar. That was pure function and no form and no ergonomic consideration. So that big, ergonomic study originally was the creation of the rapid fire shifter. So moving it under the bar and using your thumb and sometimes your index finger, and then evolving to a point where most people are using thumb, but having two different distinct positions where your thumb goes to, and having some throw and some tactile feedback, being able to do a double shift. Those were all ergonomic evolutions of a mechanical shifter that were a step in the right direction. And so there was some kind of hurdle that at the end of the day, this thing's still going to pull on a cable. But there were really smart engineers that found clever solutions to all of those things. And the lever was moving in a good direction and giving the rider good feedback. And so not throwing out everything that we had learned about shifter ergonomics for generations upon generations was, I think, ultimately why this is the shifter design that won out. And really, any design that we had come up with before, the highest approval rating that we could hope for was about 50% of the test riders. And the only thing that ever got above that 50% approval rating was this final design that just was a mechanical shifter. The compromise, though, was that, maybe the last leading idea was this off-axis shifter, so that instead of pushing straight forward to make a shift happen, you would kind of be reaching around the shifter and pulling it more towards the outside of the handlebar. So being able to kind of preserve that basic concept by just making the shifter super customizable, that you can take those little paddles and swing them inboard and make more of an off-axis shift. So it could lead to less accidental shifting through rough terrain because the shift direction isn't the same as the bump direction. But the downside to that is that it needs to be set up for your body very specifically. And if it's off by a millimeter, then somebody's going to be having accidental shifting all the time, or it'll just be uncomfortable. They won't be able to reach it. One of the really nice things about current mechanical shifters is that anybody can hop on a bike for a demo ride or a test ride and have a good experience because they're going to be able to reach everything. It's intuitive, it feels right. So that became really an important thing. Kind of the thing that I was pushing for was that I want anybody to be able to hop on this thing and figure it out and have a good test ride. And then if we can make the thing better through customization, that should be like an after the sale. Like you have taken the bike home and a couple weeks into it, you're starting to like learn all the cool little tricks that your bike can do. That's when you should start fiddling around with those paddles and fine tune that thing to make it more comfortable for you, like make it more stable so you get less accidental shifts in rough terrain, or just plain make your brain happy. And that's kind of the big one for me, is that is it's certainly easy to live with, but a mechanical shifter, like my thumb, I don't know, it makes me realize that, I don't know what it is, 5% of the population, that their thumb hits that shift paddle so square, like just dead on, that they've got 100% surface area contact. And then as they move through the throw of the shifter, like it must feel so good. And I never realized that until I've had this super customizable switch where I can do exactly that. Just twist the face of it just a little bit so that it meets my thumb head on. And it just makes my brain happy. Yeah.
For those of us with more disturbed brains, maybe, was there any thought of releasing a second shifter to let the engineers just run wild and chase a concept?
Yeah, lots of talk about, I feel like there's a lot on the table there. I'm actually curious to see if anybody will get into like the business of making aftermarket, like 3D printed plastic paddles that could mount on those little perches. Because it really is like you just take off the bolt and then the paddle could turn into anything. So making a second shifter, not necessarily, at least not right now. Like the market would need to get a bit bigger to be able to justify additional SKUs, things like that. This is the boring part of being a product manager, is factory efficiency and things like that. But I think that the bones of the shifter and like an opportunity to add custom paddles in the future, like that's still out there. We might do it, but the aftermarket upgrade companies are usually a lot more nimble. And so usually that's a good indication of what we might end up doing in the future, right? It's like people start making cool upgrade kits that, yeah, if people like it, then we'll for sure, it'll push us to do it in the future.
Nice. It's cool that it leaves it open for the aftermarket to kind of run with the bones instead of having to create their own entirely new shifter.
Yeah, we love that stuff. Anytime somebody makes something that can make a bike better in the eyes of whoever like is riding that thing day in and day out, then like, yeah, that stuff should exist for sure. We love it.
Awesome. And then sticking with shifters a little bit longer, during your presentation, you quickly mentioned that XTR would work with newer Di2 dropbar groups, like the existing Durays and Ultegra and stuff.
And GRX, I think, is the other one.
Yeah, right. Is that an indication that we will maybe seeing this making its way over to pavement, or is there some aspect of the semi-wired system that still suits road riding better?
Yeah, it's basically I had figured out a careful way to answer this question without talking about anything that is still secret. Right. Okay, here we go. So previously we have launched a new GRX Di2 group, and it's 2x12. On the mechanical side, there's both 2x12 and 1x12. So what's been missing is the 1x12 GRX group. But the reason for the semi-wireless system on the drop bar side of the business is that if you've got both a front and a rear derailleur, then it kind of makes sense to have a single battery that's powering both of your derailleurs. Also on drop bar bikes, if we don't have a dropper seat post, then we've got a very convenient place to hold that battery. Actually, one of the big stumbling blocks on the mountain bike side is not just that they've got a dropper post, but that port where the housing goes into at the front of the bike is now dedicated. Like it's going to steer the shift housing up towards the bottom of the dropper post. And so it's like a single dedicated space. But on a road bike, because everything's open inside of there, like we can put the battery inside the seat post and then the wires are free to head back to the rear triangle, for example. So that basically is the overall strategy, is that if a bike has got both a front and rear derailleur, then it'll have a wire going to the rear derailleur and a central battery. But if it's only got a rear derailleur, then we don't want to make you run a wire to the rear derailleur. So it was waiting for this solution to a battery being able to live on a derailleur. Now that that technology is available, and for sure, like as soon as the technology was available, that's when XTR Di2 was going to come out. Now it can open the door to additional components in the future.
Awesome. Cool. Last question. I think when I think about XTR historically, and maybe this is thinking a little bit too far back, it was more of a cross-country race group, because that was at that time like one of the two pinnacles of the sport. Enduro's opened that up, and a lot of the bikes that we had at the test camp are either enduro race bikes or closer to that. Is this a shift in the primary focus of XTR, or is it now just like a race group that's not a downhill group? Like, are you able to cover all that ground with one group set?
We've got so many choices in there. I mean, I guess the derailleur and the cassette are basically the same, but I mean, we had been trying to do this since the 980 generation, where we had at the time it was race and trail, because this was before enduro, so it was just kind of recognizing that not every, like, the best bike in the world doesn't have cross country race components on it. And then through M9000 and M9100, when enduro really did become a thing, then we were starting to try to actually make a cross-country race group and an enduro race group. The existing cross-country race brake was already one of the lightest ones out there. And so having that option, like, it's not something that you can find easily walking into a bike shop, but that's kind of what you end up with if you make World Cup cross-country racing components, is super lightweight stuff that maybe a lot of people don't want on their own bike at home, unless that's what your end goal is. I mean, on my cross-country bike, I've got the new option, pairing the trailer enduro brake lever with that cross-country super lightweight caliper, and then that gives you really kind of the best bang for your buck for, like, it's not really down country, because that's not what down country is, but it's a good handy term to say in between the two, right? That it's the lightest way to make a brake with more power. But I'm getting off track a little bit there. I guess the brake is an easy way to go in two totally separate directions. That, like, the 4-piston brake, that was tuned by enduro racers for enduro racers. Like, it was an enduro race brake from the beginning. So we weren't trying to make downhill racers happy with it. We weren't trying to make people who want lightweight, efficient trail bikes happy with it. We were trying to specifically target enduro racers. That's an enduro race brake. So the power and the modulation, it was all set by enduro racers. So really easy to draw a distinction between those two. For something like a crank, though, it became a lot harder to justify two wildly different designs. Like developing a crank is a lot more expensive, and then with sales volume being really low for a cross-country version, like hard to get away with making a super, super lightweight cross-country one and then making the enduro race one that we wanted to. So we went kind of back and forth on what that final direction should be for crank development for a bit. We certainly, it's a lot of the traditions that Shimano has stuck to. Some of those are being completely thrown out now, right? Like these wheels and hubs, which that's another good example that cross-country wheel, like that is a cross-country race wheel. It is dedicated. And the enduro one is kind of, it's a whole lot cheaper and just meant to be strong and easy to live with. So yeah, another good differentiator between cross-country race and enduro race. But there's cartridge bearings in those wheels. That's where I was. Sorry, got off track there a little bit. Where cup and cone bearings had been this like Shimano hallmark for forever. That's part of our identity. And the team that's working there now basically is like, yeah, we don't need to be those guys anymore. Like if the market tells us something is just plain what they prefer, whether it's better or not, then let's just do what they want. And so carbon cranks could be another one of those things. So we really were seriously considering a carbon crank, but the only performance advantage of a carbon crank is that it's lighter. And so that is important for a cross-country racer, but we really feel like the market has kind of decided that like that's the only thing that it's good for. And we're seeing really cool metal cranks becoming really popular in the market. Like I'm really thankful for brands like Keen Creek and 5Dev coming out and making metal cranks cool, because it helped me win that argument internally, that it was either going to be a dedicated cross-country carbon crank that was adopted for enduro, or a real enduro crank that was stronger than what we had made previously that got adopted for cross-country. I feel like we ended up in a pretty good place, both for cross-country and enduro. Like the enduro crank, like definitely every decision went the enduro direction. Like, let's move back to one-piece hollow forged arms. Let's make the spindle thicker. Let's move the Q factor out to just kind of what a standard mountain bike 176 Q factor is. And then the cross-country version being adapted kind of off of that, using a standard spindle and the same basic arms, but a little bit different shape to make the Q factor narrow. The good news is that the weight penalty compared to the previous one is like 1 gram. Like it's basically nothing. And so to be able to deliver a cross-country crank that was really already as light as somebody could humanly possibly make an aluminum crank arm, but to be able to increase the durability and the stiffness, like those are all, it is what it is, right? But I think we ended up in a good spot for both places. And I think like we do kind of have to recognize that people are riding their bikes harder and pushing harder, and people aren't looking at weight as like a deciding factor in which bike they're going to purchase as much as they used to.
Okay, that was my last question. And while there's a lot more that we could dive into about XTR, because there's a lot of changes here, that's all we have time for. And thank you for giving us so much time today. I'm sure you're a very busy man right now. Thank you. We'll wrap up there.
Yeah, my pleasure. And yeah, thanks for letting me talk into your can for a bit.
And that's the episode. I managed it, but Terry did the bulk of it. Thank you very much, Terry.
Oh, it was fun. It was great to ride the new XTR group for the past couple of months.
Yeah. This is one of those cases where are you working hard or hardly working? Ha ha ha. All right. This episode of the Canadian Cycling Magazine podcast is produced and edited by Adam Killick. He also did the music too. Thanks to Ontario Creates for its support. I got to add one more thing to just this discussion. I thought it was really interesting when Nick was talking about the brake lever, the humble brake lever, but it was so interesting how that had an effect on his riding in a positive way, and not just from the braking side, the stopping side of things. It's so fascinating how these changes in design have these wider implications to how you ride a bike.
Yeah, it's really interesting how mountain bike technique has changed a lot over the last couple decades, and you can see where Shimano is trying to allow riders to follow that progression instead of maybe just following tradition. So not necessarily making you a better rider, but they're allowing you to be the rider that you can be.
Ooh, they might have to steal that line for their themselves. That's a good one, Terry. All right, Terry, thank you very much. Listeners, read Terry's review online. It is insightful. It is deep. Check out Terry's thoughts and words on the new Shimano XTR group. All right, everyone, thank you for listening. Ride safely, and we'll talk to you later.